What did Stephen Jones just reveal about the Cowboys' defensive plans for 2026, and why is it turning heads at the Senior Bowl? His comments sent a clear message about where Dallas is headed on defense, and fans are already split. Some believe this signals a long-term, aggressive vision that finally fixes recurring issues, while others worry it could mean tough sacrifices and major roster shakeups ahead. Why drop this information now, and who does it impact most? One line from Stevens' remarks hints at a defensive shift that could redefine the Cowboys' identity moving forward. What's going on, Cowboys Nation? Welcome back to the channel. And today we've got to talk about something that honestly flew a little under the radar at first, but the more you listen to it, the more you realize Stephen Jones may have just dropped a massive bombshell about where the Dallas Cowboys defense is headed in 2026. And when you combine those comments with what's happening down at the Senior Bowl right now, this suddenly feels a lot bigger than just off-season talk. This feels like a roadmap. This feels like the Cowboys quietly telling the league, yet things are about to change. Now, before anyone says, oh, it's just Stephen talking or this is front office fluff, slow down for a second. Stephen Jones doesn't talk just to talk. When he starts using certain phrases, when he starts emphasizing certain ideas, that's usually the Cowboys testing the waters publicly before making real moves behind the scenes. And what he's hinting at with this defense? It's not small. It's not minor. It's not just a tweak here or there. This sounds like a philosophical shift that could completely change how Dallas builds, drafts, and deploys its defense going forward. And the timing is important, because these comments are happening right as the Cowboys staff is deep into Senior Bowl evaluations. Coaches, scouts, personnel people, all watching practices, meeting with prospects, and quietly mapping out what the roster could look like not just next season, but 2-3 years down the road. And that's where the 2026 part really matters. Stephen isn't just talking about next year. He's talking about the future structure of this defense. One of the biggest things Stephen Jones emphasized was versatility. And I know that word gets thrown around a lot in the NFL, but listen to how the Cowboys are using it now. They're not just talking about a corner who can play inside and outside, or a linebacker who can rush a little. They're talking about defenders who don't lock you into one look, one scheme, one identity. That's huge, because for years the Cowboys defense has been explosive, aggressive, and playmaking, but also, at times, predictable. Think about it. When Dallas is at its best, they're attacking. They're hunting quarterbacks. They're creating chaos. But when things go wrong, when an opponent has time to prepare, when injuries hit, when the matchup isn't perfect, suddenly the defense can get exposed. Stephen's comments strongly suggest the Cowboys want a defense that can morph week to week without having to overhaul personnel. That's not easy. That requires very specific types of players. And guess where you find those players? Exactly. Events like the Senior Bowl. Down in Mobile, the Cowboys' presence has been noticeable. Not loud, not flashy, but focused. And the types of players they've been spending extra time with tell you a lot. Hybrid defenders. Long corners. Safeties who can cover, tackle, and communicate. Defensive linemen who don't just rush straight ahead but can move, stunt, and hold up against the run. This all lines up perfectly with what Stephen Jones is hinting at. Another thing Stephen mentioned that raised eyebrows was the idea of long-term defensive sustainability. That's not a phrase you use if you're just happy with how things are. That's a phrase you use when you're thinking about cap management, aging stars, injury risk, and playoff matchups. The Cowboys know they've leaned heavily on stars like Micah Parsons, and while that's worked, it also puts pressure on one player to be superhuman every week. What Stephen is hinting at is a defense that doesn't collapse if one star has an off day or misses time. That's big. That's forward thinking. And it also suggests that the Cowboys are already planning for life beyond certain current defensive leaders. Not because they're bad, not because they're leaving tomorrow, but because smart teams don't wait until the cupboard is empty to start shopping. Now let's talk about scheme, because this is where things get really interesting. Stephen didn't come out and say we're changing schemes, but he didn't deny it either. Instead, he talked about adaptability, about being able to match up with modern offenses, about not being stuck doing one thing just because that's what you've always done. If you read between the lines, it sounds like the Cowboys are preparing for a more flexible defensive identity. One that can play aggressive man coverage one week, then switch to more zone-heavy, disguise-based looks the next. And that ties directly into what coaches are reportedly focusing on at the Senior Bowl practices. Communication, processing speed, football IQ. You don't run adaptable defenses with guys who can only do one thing. You need players who understand leverage, spacing, and responsibilities at a high level. You need defenders who can think as fast as they move. Another subtle but important part of Stevens' comments was how he framed defense relative to offense. For a long time, the Cowboys have been known as an offense-first team. Big names, big contracts, big expectations. But Stevens' tone suggested a recalibration. Not abandoning offense, but recognizing that in today's NFL, playoff success often comes down to whether your defense can adjust on the fly, whether they can survive when things aren't perfect. That's not accidental language. That's learned language. That's language that comes from watching playoff games where explosive offenses get slowed down, where disciplined defenses win ugly, where one or two key stops change everything. And if you look at the types of prospects the Cowboys are watching closely in mobile, it supports this idea. They're not just drooling over sack totals. They're asking about assignments, about leadership, about how players handle adjustments, about how quickly they pick up new concepts. That screams long-term defensive planning. Now let's address the elephant in the room, Micah Parsons. Anytime we talk about the future of the Cowboys defense, Micah is central to the conversation. Stephen Jones made it clear that Micah is still the centerpiece, but what's interesting is how they want to maximize him. Not just by letting him rush every snap, but by building a defense around him that creates favorable matchups. That means better depth. That means more players who can win one-on-one so offenses can't just slide everything Micah's way. This is where Senior Bowl defensive linemen come into play. Guys who may not be top 5 picks, but who fit exactly what Dallas wants. Tough, versatile, coachable. Players who can rotate, stay fresh, and do their job without needing the spotlight. Those are the types of additions that can quietly transform a defense over time. Stephen also touched on the importance of defensive backfield flexibility, and that should get Cowboys fans excited. The NFL is becoming more positionless on offense, which means defenses have to respond in kind. Corners who can tackle, safeties who can cover tight ends and slot receivers, players who don't tip your hand pre-snap. The Cowboys appear very aware of this, and again, it's reflected in who they're evaluating right now. One thing that stood out from Senior Bowl week is how much time the Cowboys staff has spent watching defensive backs in one-on-one drills. Not just watching, but talking, teaching, testing. That tells you they're looking for more than raw talent. They're looking for mental toughness. For guys who can get beat on a rep, then come back locked in on the next one. That's playoff football mentality. Another layer to this is contract planning. Stephen Jones is heavily involved in the financial side of the team, and when he talks about long-term defensive plans, he's also talking about cost control. Drafting and developing defenders who can contribute on rookie contracts gives you flexibility elsewhere. It allows you to make tough decisions without blowing up the entire unit. That's smart team building, and it's something the Cowboys have been trying to balance for years. Now, some fans might hear all this and think, okay, but when does this actually show up on the field? And that's fair. The answer is gradually, but intentionally. You're not going to wake up one day and see a completely different Cowboys defense. Instead, you'll see small changes. Different types of draft picks. Different rotations. Different matchups. And over time, those changes add up.